Hello. Warhammer and Games Workshop has evolved and changed a great deal over the years, and a lot of that change can be witnessed in the pages of its books and magazines. My guest today is Graham Davey, a former editor at Games Workshop who worked on White Dwarf magazine. He worked on the part work for the Lord of the Rings battle games in Middle-earth, and he had a hand in the creation of many other 40k and Warhammer Fantasy books. We talked about the process behind creating those magazines and periodicals, and some of the ambition that went into the creation of Warhammer Fantasy Battles 8th edition. I'm Jordan, this is Jordan Sorcery, and today I'm in conversation with former Games Workshop editor Graham Davey. Graham, thank you so much for joining me. We're going to get into your career at Games Workshop and sort of the work that you did there and how things evolved and changed over time. But I like to start by just exploring a bit about your origins as a gamer. So how did you first get into wargaming?
Right. Well, that's a long time ago. I think probably a few little different strands, as I recall. So certainly, all those early adventure game books like Warlock of Firetop Mountain and City of Thieves and stuff like that. That was definitely a big starting point. And then one of my uncles was quite a big war gamer, big painter, and he was a member of Selweg, Southeast London Warlords.
Mm.
And I remember him taking me to one of their big conventions when I was probably, I don't know, maybe only like 7 or 8 or something.
Right.
And it was a big historical battle, and he put me in charge of a single unit of armored knights, which kind of slowly moved across the table and eventually got to have a fight. And this was, I think, back when it was just using tables to work out the result of a combat, no dice or anything like that. So
Right.
kind of real old school historical.
Right.
Um, uh, but yeah, that was a big kind of starting influence from him, and encouragement to kind of start painting. And there was a little hobby shop in the town where I lived, with like a single stand of Citadel miniatures. So I started getting the occasional model and occasional set for birthdays and things like that.
Right.
And then later on, I think secondary school, we started doing D&D at lunchtimes and things like that. So
Sure, yeah. That's interesting. I mean, you mentioned the fighting fantasy, the game books, because D&D for a lot of folks, it seems the other way around. Like a lot of people get into the D&D first. But were you picking up the fighting fantasy books, playing through those before then, like more traditional
yes,
role playing? Yeah.
yeah, much earlier. Yeah, I mean,
Right.
uh, I think there weren't many people around who were into the same things at that point. So um, it was a while before I knew anyone. Well, before I really had any awareness of Dungeons and Dragons. I think the adventure game books came first. Um, and certainly there weren't a lot of people doing it. So in order to actually um, have a group and play a game, that was a little way off. That happened later.
Sure. Yeah. So when did it then become something that you wanted to pursue professionally?
Um, it was kind of an accident, to be perfectly honest. Um, I kind of left university and then did a course in advertising, and was kind of living in North London in a grotty place trying to get into advertising, and really not enjoying it at all. And got really fed up, and just randomly spotted an advert for staff at the Cambridge Games Workshop store, which was roughly near where my parents lived, where I grew up. Um, So I applied for that. I just ditched the whole advertising idea entirely and applied for that. Just wanted to do something fun for a bit. Um, yeah. I went up, pretended I knew how to play Warhammer. I really didn't at all at that point. Um, um, it had the old. There was an old box set which had lots of little card figures in, but I'd never had anywhere near enough models to actually play a game or an opponent. Um, so yeah, I just blagged it and was kind of um, loud and excited, and that seemed to swing it. Um,
Sure. Do you remember what was the sort of culture and feel of the stores when you joined? Around
um,
when was it? Do you remember?
well, the I think the latest set was the Warhammer set with the Lizard Man versus the Bretonians.
Right. Okay. So around fifth edition
Um,
then.
and every store had been given this monolithic kind of resin ziggurat thing to put in the middle of the table. I think a lot of people might remember that from that time. Um, so that was going on. There was a new edition of Space Hulk. We did a lot of playing of Space Hulk.
Hmm.
40k set was just some quite old looking orcs versus space marines. Uh, so yeah, you just kind of very lots of intro
Sure.
gaming um, and we just after work, practically every day after work, we just shut the shop and people were playing. We were playing games, and it was just we didn't do anything else but gaming. So it was it was a lot of fun.
Was it quite relaxed in the stores, or like I imagine thinking to my own experience being a kid annoying the members of staff around that time. I
Um,
imagine there was a level of having to deal with a lot of like kids coming in and that sort of stuff.
I mean, obviously, there was a lot of kids. It was the Cambridge store at that point was kind of really hidden. It wasn't on the main street, so you had to know where it was.
Hmm.
So it was always practically empty half of the day. Um, and yeah, then school's empty, and then you always got a rush at the end of the day. But that was just kind of part of the routine.
Sure.
Um, and yeah, and there was a lot of there was certain regular customers that we knew that were old enough to kind of stay after hours and play games with us. Um, it was very competitive atmosphere in terms of the gaming. Um,
Right.
yes, really, very. No one was worried about particularly. I mean, I think most stuff was painted, but um, I remember. I mean, there was at one very extreme. I remember someone not only hadn't painted their stuff but hadn't assembled it. So I remember putting. I think it was like orc catapults or something, and they just put down two piles of lead onto the back of the table and said, "Those are my catapults."
Would this have been around the time, like, because was staff able to get things on, like, by weight and things like
Yeah,
that back then,
yeah.
right? Did that contribute to, like, building a collection
Absolutely,
during
yeah.
that
That
era?
was started my love of Chaos Space Marines. Um, that was 40k uh was the big focus, certainly in our store, and at that point it felt like the kind of the new exciting thing where new stuff was still happening.
Hmm, right. So then when did you transition from the store into the sort of head office space?
um I think it was maybe about 9 months I was there, and there was an advert for jobs on White Dwarf in the studio. um and a couple of us from Cambridge applied, and we both ended up moving. I didn't get picked. They were after lots of jobs in the studio. Um, so a few people went into White Dwarf, a few people became assistant game developers, um, and I got put on to the editorial team under Lindsay Priestley,
Right.
Rick's wife, because she ran that department at that point. Um, I think it was a bit of that. Also, I'd written, as part of my application for that job, I'd written this little kind of piece of color text, fluff text, about necromundery, I think. Um, and they had an idea at that point that they wanted to put color text on the back of boxes of sets. So somebody thought, oh, this guy could do that job for us.
Right.
And they slotted me in. So I worked on that. That happened very occasionally, in fact. I don't think I did many at all. I think the idea went away quite quickly. But there was one brief period where there were little extracts of color text on the back of new sets. But mainly I was just working on the editorial team. So essentially we were kind of proofreading and editing and laying out the black and white pages of the codexes and the army books.
Right.
And a whole other department did the 16-page color section with all the photos.
Right. Right. So what do you remember any of those like early books that you were working on there then?
Um, I'd struggle. I could
Sure.
maybe guess. I think it was probably Eldar codexes happening.
Right.
Um, uh,
It's probably an unfair question, I guess,
yeah,
because
yes, that's too far back. I'm afraid.
yeah,
Just drag that out of my memory.
it's really interesting that I find because obviously for the people who are receiving these products and these books, like they're quite monumental moments of it's a
Hmm.
new game, it's a new edition, it's a new codex. But I imagine at the other end of the process, it you've got a couple of days to work on that, and you're trying to get through it and get it done, and then move on to the next thing and the next thing, right? So it must feel quite different to like in the production process versus
Well, I mean, probably more than. I mean, I would guess there was probably a book coming out every month, maybe.
right. Okay.
So, which relates to us having about a month to work on something. Um, so, it was a fairly long process to, edit and proofread everything quite thoroughly. Became very good at grammar. Um, uh, and then all the kind of the typeset. Well, we were using Quark Express to do all the layout. So learning all about that and the typography and the different rules for that. Um, so yeah, it was we were on each book for a little while.
Right.
But that said, I still can't remember specific
Sure.
ones from that point.
Was there a lot of like, like I mean, I imagine from a house style and a sort of production perspective, there must have been a lot of, I don't know if they were written or unwritten rules about how a Games Workshop book should read, should feel. Like, was there a lot of stuff in that kind of space?
Uh, well, our job was really not to really just to kind of remove all the mistakes.
Right.
Um,
Sure.
so that was really the purview of the games development team who were writing stuff. So
Right.
um, I remember one of my little snippets for the back of the box. One of my first ones was an orc one, um, and I'd done the whole thing in the kind of orky speak with kind of all missing letters and apostrophes and stuff. And I remember Andy Chambers giving me some feedback and saying you can be far more subtle about this because you get to a point where it's really hard to understand what the sentence actually is, and you can just kind of give this kind of hint of that idea with just a few little things rather than changing every letter. Um, so yeah, that games dev was set apart. They were literally up on a mezzanine
Right.
uh, overlooking the rest of us down on the ground floor.
Right.
Um, so yeah, this was just when the studio was still on Carter Boulevard in Nottingham before they moved to the current big HQ.
Right.
I was there for about a year before we moved.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, what was the feel of that, like as an office space and the sort of many people working there? Was it quite a sort of friendly atmosphere, quite a creative space?
Yeah, lots of people were playing games a lot. I remember while I was there, they were working and developing Gorka Morka.
Right.
Um, so everyone was kind of scratch building their own little wagons and vehicles in order to play test and join in. Um, so yeah, it was very much kind of felt like everyone was gaming and enjoying it all.
Hmm. Yeah. Did you? Am I right that you did some work with White Dwarf? Then did you move into White Dwarf, or did you contribute some
Yeah,
stuff to White Dwarf?
yeah, it was shortly after we moved to the big HQ. Um, Paul Sawyer took over as editor.
Mhm.
Uh, and I think that coincided with me getting moved across.
Right.
Um, um, so yeah, I started working there instead. Doing, I remember doing a little painting guide for for Digger Knob, which was the Gorka Morka supplement. Well, I think that was the first thing I wrote. Uh, and yeah, and then I spent a lot of time as a dwarfer.
Hmm. Sure. I mean, what was that like as a sort of day-to-day job? I mean, because again, I imagine you're on quite a like scheduled process, right? Because you have to do an issue every month. So,
Yeah,
was there quite a ticking clock? Did it feel quite pressured at times?
extremely.
Right.
Um, yeah, yeah. Obviously, with a monthly schedule, you kind of always up against it. So yeah, it was a much tighter turnaround. Um, Obviously, it was a very different sort of magazine back then, and we were obviously we're doing articles to promote the new stuff, but there was also, as White Dwarfers, we were just writing articles about whatever hobby we were doing at the time. So it was a much looser, less kind of structured uh, magazine. So I would do a thing about the latest Chaos Black Legion, Chaos Space Marines I was doing, or I converted my Bloodthirster and did an article about that just without really being asked. It was just that's what you did as a White Dwarfer.
Right. Yeah, because would stuff like that, would you have to like pitch that? So would you have to go to Paul Sawyer and say like, I've done this. Are you interested in it, or was it sort of organically coming up in conversation? And
I think certainly for the more experienced people, I felt I can't remember how official. It certainly wasn't any sort of official pitching
right,
process, anything like that. Um, I think you know, AD would do a big new Orky table, and obviously everyone went without saying that he'd do a number of articles about it. It was just kind of expected almost, I would say.
right,
And
sure,
then once we had the articles, they'd just get slotted in and fit wherever.
sure, yeah. I've always wondered as well about the sort of relationship between. So when White Dwarf is doing, if you're including some lore, you're building some background, that kind of stuff. Like, how closely monitored is that from the development team? Was there a lot of communication about, okay, we want to include this, or did you just sort of make sure that you were drawing within the lines, for example?
Um, it would depend what it was.
Right.
So, I mean, quite often I would write up the battle reports, and I kind of tended to kind of craft it into a bit of a story,
Mm.
and that wouldn't have any sort of overview.
Right.
Whereas I don't know, later on we were doing the what was it called? The Index of Astartes articles,
Right.
which were, full on almost setting the background. And I wrote the Black Legion one and the Alpha Legion one, and it was uh, that we were essentially setting the background for the first time for those specific legions.
Mm.
So that had a lot of overview from Andy Chambers.
Right.
Um, so yeah, it kind of varied depending on what the thing was.
Sure.
And then obviously, kind of the more commercial side of stuff would have overview from managementy types.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Because I mean, obviously, it's the White Dwarf has at times a sort of move between being more sort of catalog focused, being more sales focused, at other times being hobby and sort of creative focused. I think that era was quite a good balance between those different
Yeah,
aspects of
yeah, I
things,
think
wasn't
so.
it? Yeah.
Um, yeah, it was a fairly good mix while I was there. I mean, I was there for a long time,
Mm.
but I think Paul managed to keep it as a good balance. I remember there was a good example of the kind of management influence coming in where we did the plastic dreadnought came out, the first ever plastic dreadnought,
Right.
and we did this wonderful double page spread covered in amazing photos of the dreadnought in all the different coloured dreadnoughts that they heavy metal had painted up in different terrains and all looked fantastic. And then I think of course, it was Alan Merritt in his overview of everything came to have a look over and got very annoyed at us. And explained, which was a big revelation at the time, that the reason to do a plastic dreadnought was not to sell plastic dreadnoughts, was to sell all the Space Marine range, which was obvious once you had it pointed out, but none of us had worked that out at that point. Um, so we had to photograph the entire spread and put in loads of Space Marines next to the dreadnought.
Right. Yeah. Oh, that's fascinating because that's such a it's really interesting how like those kind of subtle decisions can be quite important, and
Yeah,
for good reason and a lot of good commercial reason at times as well. Like it's so interesting, like having to make those decisions throughout like every issue, I guess, and trying to make sure that that's considered when okay, we're going to do an article about X, but that needs to be relevant to other stuff that's happening, right? Other things that are
mm,
available. Yeah, because even the like the Tale of Four Gamers kind of stuff, which was aspirational, I suppose, isn't it, to get people to have that same sort of experience when they build their armies and they go off and
yeah.
buy their armies. So, I mean, did you say you worked at White Dwarf for a long time? Was it like did you miss it when you left White Dwarf? Was it like overall a sort of favorable, positive experience working on it?
Oh yeah, it was a great experience. Yes, so I and I kind of worked my way up and ended up being, I think I was called the production editor. So I was kind of Paul's right hand man, and it was my responsibility to to run the schedule by that point. Um, so yeah, we got very late. There was a point where we were really behind schedule.
Right.
Um, because everything just landed on Paul's desk, and then we were always just waiting for him to look over stuff and tell us what to change. Um, so yeah, but I went from that to being becoming the editor of Battle Games in Middle Earth,
Sure, right.
which was two weekly, so it was even more mental.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, well, I was really interested about this then. So, did you like how did it come about then? How did the sort of Battle Games in Middle Earth magazine, the sort of part work magazine, was it where was the idea floated, I guess, to start with?
Um, I think, I mean, it was a very business. It was a really business decision.
Hmm,
I don't know where the idea was spawned, but
sure.
uh, there was a manager called called Max Bottrell who was manager of the studio for quite became manager of the studio later. Um, but I think he was essentially driving this idea and had linked up with the part work company, De Agostini, who did all these kind of part works where you kind of, I don't know, build the Titanic with 100 different parts,
Hmm,
stuff like that. Um, uh, yeah, and it was just this general idea to try and do that with, well, Lord of the Rings was obviously the one they picked.
hmm,
To and kind of take that opportunity of Lord of the Rings was already pulling in new customers for Games Workshop, and it was really put that on steroids. And I think there's a lot of people that was their point of entry into Games Workshop was that magazine.
sure. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because that the sort of the D'Agostini, obviously having done many of these part works, I believe still do these sort of part works. I imagine there is like a special process, like it has its own quirks, I'm guessing, to actually
Mm,
create, physically create and release and distribute
yeah,
a part work like that.
yeah. The first of all, there's kind they just do we had to do the first four issues as a test, and they just put that out in one region of the country
Right.
to see how it does. And if that reaches a certain threshold, then they'll relaunch it everywhere.
Right.
And then we had to start kind of doing it two weekly.
Right.
But the early first test of the four backs, we worked very closely with an editor from the Agostini, so they brought a very different attitude to it. Every single page had to be really visual and visually appealing, and pictures everywhere, and far more better explanations and clearer, less assumed knowledge.
Mm,
No, had to assume someone but has absolutely no clue what the hobby is about whatsoever, and really start from complete brass tacks.
sure. Yeah. Yeah. Because I'm guessing that the actual, I'm sure there was a lot of crossover readership of that and White Dwarf. But I'm imagining that there would have been a lot of, like you say, a lot of people whose first entry point into the hobby is through this magazine. So they've
It
never
really was.
played
Yeah,
anything, never seen it, never had a model in their hands, like
yeah,
a Citadel model. So, like, did that? I guess that changes like the writing in quite a significant way, right?
yeah. Especially at those beginning ones, it was really kind of just showing people that just need paint on the end of the brush, and that you have to then mix in a bit of water,
Mm,
and then you need to clean your brush, and just so kind of basic and starting level, that you would never even considered of saying in White Dwarf, certainly at that point. And yeah, because it went on newsstands everywhere, they absolutely swamp it out. The first issue is always an amazingly good value. Um, so so thousands and thousands of people buy that first issue, and then it kind of drops steeply down, and to a certain level of people who carry on buying it and
mm.
subscribe properly. But it was the certainly at that point, it was the most successful part what D'Agostino had ever done,
Wow,
and I think it was for quite some time.
incredible!
And I mean, essentially, the one of the new buildings at the head office was paid for off the back of that.
Really?
Yeah,
Wow. I mean, and because obviously it was it's a cultural phenomenon, right? Lord of the Rings. It was huge. People were going to see it in droves. obviously it brought a lot of people into Games Workshop with the battle game. That's fascinating though to hear that it's that sort of scale of success to have outstripped so many of those other part works that D'Agostino were doing. Um, that's incredible. I mean, because is there a sort of, I mean, you mentioned that steep curve down, that threshold that they have for right, this is going to go national. I'm guessing that they have baked in a certain amount of sort of attrition, I suppose, right?
Mm.
Of like, because once you get to a certain point, you can't. It must be harder. When you're on issue 40, a new person coming in is going to struggle to get into.
You couldn't even do that because after a certain point it was only subscriber.
Oh, right.
They
Okay.
literally only the first, I don't know, four or whatever, however many, the early issues are the only ones in that went in newsagents.
That's interesting. So it then becomes subscription only after a
I
certain
think so.
point.
I think
Right.
so.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then so your pool of potential readers gets smaller and smaller and smaller with every issue, right? So you must have had to do some amazing work to retain enough people.
Well, essentially, they encourage people to subscribe, and obviously there's some drop off. But once you subscribe, most people kind of stick with it.
Right.
And there was, special things at certain stages that you'd get to make trying to sweeten the idea. But
Sure.
it was still, I think, compared to a lot of part works, it was still quite good value because you were still getting at least a metal model or a sprue or something every time, which was not really not too bad for the price.
No,
Um,
absolutely, yeah. I mean, how were those decisions made? Was it like who was deciding what was going to be sort of parceled out and available for going in with each magazine, with each issue?
we had a fairly free hand, so it was all worked out within our little battle games team.
Mm,
Um, uh, and there was a certain price point that we could do, and within that we had a fairly free range. So we worked it all out. So it was so the kind of the expertise level was gradually growing throughout the run.
right.
From obviously very basic at the beginning, but we kind of gradually taught to people new painting techniques and how to build terrain and more complicated aspects of the rules. Um, so yeah, that was generally worked out, and then every so often there was a special. I don't know, the Christmas edition. We had more budget, so we could do a mounted Gandalf or something.
Right.
And we were allowed to put in a more expensive model.
Sure. Right. Do you remember how many issues you actually made it to then? Or
Personally, I don't know. I think um, I'm guessing 60 or 70, something like that. I know. Well, I left and Mark Latham took over as editor, and he ended up doing more than me. But
right.
because it just kept on, it was just so
I mean, that's
successful. It's kept on getting extended. But I remember there was plans for a 40k one
right.
towards the end of my time in that department. We were kind of working out the plans and the costings, and the powers that be put a stop to it because it was actually the battle games was kind of so successful it was causing problems in the stores
Right.
because they were just suddenly swamped with so many people, all these kind of random people who'd seen the things in the news agent, and a lot of them weren't really in it for the long haul, and it was actually just causing a lot of issues in the stores. And I think for that reason they decided they didn't want to do it again for 40k.
Really? That's
Hmm.
fascinating. Yeah. I mean, because obviously, like ultimately, they would. I believe they have since done a number of 40k and Age of Sigmar
Yeah,
artworks, right?
yeah. But I think at that point the because we had like the first 20 issues worked out
Right.
and kind of basically written. Um, but yeah, at that point there was uh, I mean, it wasn't the workshop wasn't quite the monolithic industrial behemoth that it is now. They were still kind of uh, finding their feet in some way areas. They were just kind of starting to break into America, and
Mm.
um, so they were trying to focus on the core business. I think is the and not get distracted by random things off on the side too much.
Sure. Yeah, which makes sense, and it obviously worked out in the long run
Mm.
for them. Yeah. So then you came back across to the sort of the main sort of center of GW. So what was that move then? Where you went into the game development team? Is that right?
Uh, yeah, sort of. Essentially, well, as I say, Max Bottrell was the manager at Battle Games, and he moved across first and became the manager of the studio at that point. Um, so I'd been constantly bending his ear about what I thought needed to change in the studio. Um, uh, and particularly, I had some ideas about kind of pulling all the different creative strands together better. Um, so essentially, you had different departments in the studio just doing their own little bit of the job, um, and they weren't really coordinated at all. They just all get this part would make the like I say, the black and white pages. This department would make the color pages. This someone else would do the cover, and just at the end of the process, they'd all just get stuck together. Um, and there was a particular example of, I think it was the Chaos Chaos Warriors army book, whereas the inside cover had this amazing picture of a Chaos Warrior, and then the first black and white page facing it had this amazing picture of a Chaos Warrior, and no one had realised that they were going to be facing each other. Um, so essentially, I pitched the idea that there should be some sort of central person as the a kind of creative editor, uh, looking off, kind of looking after the whole thing. And because Max knew me from the previous thing, they created that job, and I was kind of attached to games development to do that, because they kind of had they were the ones kind of mostly involved in putting the books together.
Right.
Um,
Right. Right. And because you got to work on the eighth edition of Warhammer Fantasy, right? The sort of the
is that
big book.
the really big book?
The
Yes.
really big book, yeah. I mean, absolutely gorgeous book, but
Mhm.
chock full of stuff. Like a real, there's a huge amount of information from modeling and hobby through the world, through the rules, obviously. I mean, what was that experience like? Do you remember much of that?
Yeah, I think there was Jeremy Vitok was a big mover in that. So I think by that point I think he was running games development by that point. And he was absolutely so passionate about the kind of the narrative side of gaming and the background, and he kind of really kind of prior to him it was much more kind of tournament play was the focus up to that point, and then he was really pushed the more kind of characterful side of gaming, because that had always been his big passion. So yeah, it was great. We were doing there was these amazing big kind of panoramas that Dave Andrews was doing, kind of huge big battlefields, and it was just a massive kind of studio wide push to do the most amazing book.
Yeah,
So
and
yeah.
it is. I think it as just as an artifact, that book is got to be one of the strongest sort of encapsulations of Warhammer as an art form, I guess, and sort of covering every aspect of it. I mean,
Yeah,
there's like the gatefold siege of Volganov, I think it is.
yeah,
Yeah,
something like that. Yeah,
which is just incredible and
yeah,
amazing
it's
diorama, but
absolutely stunning. Yes.
it really is, right? It really is. So, I mean, was that because there's quite a lot of folks listed in the credits for that book?
Mm.
So it seems like they don't. I mean, you said it was like an all hands push almost across the organization. Do you remember any of the sort of the remit around eighth edition or the sort of the ambition for it, the drive?
I think so. Just correct me. Is that the one where we went with much bigger units as well?
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I thought so. Yeah, it was just about kind of making everything bigger.
Right.
Um, so the gaming side, I remember it was just because we'd spent so long it was just these little 4x4 units of everything, wasn't it? Um, because there was no point doing anything bigger. Um, and so there was just this drive to do kind of bigger game, allow people um, to kind of, you know, have a reason to make bigger armies, really, which was a kind of a commercial drive to it as well. Um, and it just looked amazing on the table, having these huge units and much bigger battlefields, and yeah, it just kind of, I think it was building on the back of Apocalypse for 40k, which I also was quite involved with, which was just took it from being this took 40k from that kind of very set. You generally pay 1,500 points. It was very competitive, and there was no reason to have much of a bigger army than that. And then Apocalypse just it was what 40k ought to be about. It was like these huge. It was trying to make. I think for both books, it's trying to make what was happening on the table actually be a much better reflection of what the background was
Hmm,
saying. These huge, epic, incredible battles. Um, Whereas the tape up until that point, what was happening on the table was quite small and
sure.
exacting. So it was just opening things up, and it's kind of and it was awesome, frankly.
I mean, do you remember what the sort of like the reaction was amongst the player base to, well, I guess to both Apocalypse and to the eighth edition of Warhammer?
Well, I think Apocalypse certainly was very good because all of a sudden you were bringing in um, super heavy tanks, and Edge started to bring in, you know, Titans and shoot, big stompers, and all of these much bigger kits became, um, instead of a kind of really niche Forge World thing, suddenly became into the mainstream.
Hmm,
Um, so I think that was hugely exciting for everyone, and it was. Um, Whereas Warhammer, I'm not sure it quite had the same. Um, I don't know if it landed in quite the same way.
sure. Yeah. Yeah, because I mean, in retrospect, it's certainly that push to larger units and kind of bigger armies and more centerpiece models and that sort of stuff doesn't seem to have played out quite as
No,
favorably for fantasy as it did for 40k.
well, it was the last one, really. Was it that? Am I right? It was the
That's
last
right.
edition
Yeah,
before they blew up the world.
that's right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But it's there's certainly it's really interesting to hear that sort of broader. It is awesome to see these things, and that what is in that book is magnificent. You
Mm,
are seeing this really aspirational version of a Warhammer battle, I guess, on the tabletop. That becomes a different thing when you need to make that army on that sort of scale
yeah.
yourself, doesn't it? Yeah.
Well, I think that was the in a kind of very commercial business sense, Warhammer was just lagging lagging further and further behind 40k, and that book just didn't fix that problem.
Mm.
So I mean, it's just, particularly back then, the investment in every plastic kit was such a large amount of money. Why why would they why would they want to keep doing Warhammer kits when they could just do a new Space Marine kit and make 10 times more out of it? And there was just that mismatch, and things weren't working.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And obviously you sort of see how that story continued. I mean, was there
Mm.
a lot of other books and products that you worked on during that era of your career?
Many. um,
Any that stand out as like particularly memorable or exciting?
um, well, certainly Apocalypse was probably one of the biggest ones. I think, I guess, well, I was going to say more time, but that was while I was on White Dwarf.
Mm,
More time was a lot of fun,
right.
um, and everyone got very, very into that. Um, uh, I did things like the Planet Strike book. Sorry, I'm looking over here at my bookshelf. Try and remember. Um, um, so there was, yes, Planet Strike. There was the City Fight
Mhm.
book. There was all uh, the Index of Astartes books started to become a thing and started to get published. Um, so that was a lot of fun. And then countless army books and codexes and things like that.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, the that's interesting what you were saying about like Gorka Morka that had like a real in the studio or in the within the company like a
Mm.
huge reaction and sounds like a lot of folks were playing it and are getting into it and same with More Time and this sort of skirmish games seem to do quite well internally, right?
Mm.
Did that ever sort of was that an indicator for like how things might be received?
Well, I mean, I guess not, because Mordheim's been wildly successful and Gorkamorka was was at
Sure,
the
sure,
other
yeah,
end of the scale.
yeah,
Um, I think the thing with a skirmish game is just that much more accessible, because in terms of time and effort and money, um, it's just takes less effort to have enough to play
mm,
compared to having to have 2,000 point army, which is going to take you a year, and you know vastly more cash if you're a customer.
yeah,
So yeah, that's where a skirmish game kind of does its job really well, because you can just get into it, play, more time. Your little gang, your little force of 10 men. You just have fun painting them up in some lunch times, and you can get on with it and play.
mm, sure, yeah. Which I guess makes sense as well. I think because since leaving Games Workshop, you've moved into creating those kind of skirmish games as well yourself, right?
Mm,
Yeah. So I mean,
yeah.
what was the sort of? So I think it's Test of Honor. Was that your first game, the sort of samurai game?
Yes. So I ended up off. I'm skipping a few different stages, but I ended up at Warlord Games,
Right.
with John Sallard and Paul Sawyer again.
Mm,
So I think that's kind of a big part of getting a job at Warlord,
right.
was because I knew Paul quite well. Um, um, so yeah, while I was at Warlord, um, I was involved in writing this Test of Honor game, just because I'd done a lot of martial arts, and as had one of the other chaps there, which kind of leads on to this kind of interest in Japanese stuff and samurai. So we just wrote this game for fun, and it's very much kind of 10 to 20 people on either side. Really wanted to kind of capture that kind of real loose spinning sword play of this kind of elite samurai spinning around, cutting down one guy, spinning around, cutting down someone else, and not having people up, kind of fixed in place when they're fighting, which was a very Games Workshop thing. Of once you're in combat, you're stuck. So that was a big difference, kind of breaking that away, so you can just attack and then you're free again. And it became a much kind of looser, more fluid game. And it was very successful at Warlord, and then I left and set up my own company specifically to publish that and some others since then.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, because I mean, you mentioned like Mordheim and the excitement that Mordheim still generates, but you've explored like, a different sort of dark kind of skirmishy fantasy world, right, with your Traitor's Toll game.
Yeah, so the Guards of Traitor's Toll is it's a living kind of not breathing fantasy city where people are just going about their business, selling fish and pickpocketing and trading and traveling, and so it's just your classic fantasy city that you might have played a D&D game in, or City of Thieves fancy book, or played lots of computer games. I really tried to make it generic enough that it kind of fits into anyone's imagination of what a fantasy city ought to be like. And then you play the guards, trying to kind of solve crime and arrest pickpockets and assassins and rogue wizards. And it's a kind of much less competitive game because all the players have got their own little guard captain and little team of guards, and you're just trying to be the most successful at arresting people and not upset the populace and cause any rebellions or anything like that.
Right.
So yeah, it's quite a different approach in that it's like a war game without any war. You're not just trying to kill the other side as fast as possible.
Yeah. It sounds like it'd be great for like creating stories there as well at the tabletop.
Yeah, it's a very, very, very kind of narrative thing. You never know, kind of, you're pulling cards to find out what happens. And you've got a table full of kind of civilian models, kind of just going about their day. And you'll pull a card which says, "Oh, find a model with bare feet. They're now a pickpocket. They're going to run off, and you need to try and chase them down and catch them before they escape the board." Or a drunken dwarf starts shouting and causing ruckus, or everything can happen and often does during the game, and you just have to deal with it.
That's very fun. Yeah, I like that. That sort of spontaneous kind of story emerging and then how you're reacting to it. That's really great. I mean, how is it different, like working like with your own publishing company? I imagine it's quite a different sort of marketplace and the sort of like the approaches you must have to take and this kind of way you must work. I'm guessing that's quite different to a Warlord or a Games Workshop environment.
Um, I am at the other end of the scale, in that it's largely a one-man company with lots of help, but it's all these kind of different things that I picked up over the years at Games Workshop, at Warlord, the editing, layout, and photography, and doing the website and the web store, and so I kind of, it's kind of that same idea of when I went back to the studio, wanted to control everything. Now I really can control everything.
Sure. Yeah. Is what's next then for your games and your game company?
Well, so again, because it's just me, then 3 games are probably enough.
Sure.
Because obviously you want to keep supporting them and bringing out new stuff and new expansions and new models and new sets. So So I've got loads more ideas for Traitor's Toll. We're sort of slowly evolving there's an overarching story and some kind of plot points of things happening in the city, kind of behind the scenes that you'll slowly get to discover. Whereas at the same time, I've got the third game that we haven't mentioned, which is 0200 Hours, which is World War II, but kind of nighttime stealthy SAS missions. So there's more stuff coming to that. I'm working on sculpts for that at the moment, and yeah, it's just kind of keeping bringing out new stuff for all three.
Sure. Yeah. Exciting. Yeah, that's great. Well, I will include a link to your website down in the description below.
Marvelous, thank you.
Yeah, it sounds like there's some really fun stuff there as well, and yeah, I really like the idea of Guards of Traitor's Toll. That sounds like a really fun game.
Yeah, thanks very much, Jordan. That'll be really, really useful.
Sure. Well, I think this has been a really terrific conversation, Graham. So thank you so much for taking the time to chat to me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, it's been lots of fun. Thanks, Jordan.
Massive thanks to Graham for taking the time to chat to me about his amazing career and work at Games Workshop. It was a real joy. Thank you, Graham. If you would like to find out more about Graham's games like Guards at Traitor's Toll and Test of Honor, then you can follow the link in the description down below to check out his company, Grey for Now Games. And visit patreon.com/Jordan Sorcery if you would like exclusive and early access to interviews, articles, blog posts, podcasts, all sorts of cool stuff about the history of Warhammer, the history of Games Workshop, and behind the scenes around my work, exploring all of that. Your support is the only way I can continue to do what I do, so I am so grateful for all of your help. Thank you once again to Graham. Thank you for joining us. I'm Jordan, and this is Jordan Sorcery.